finger, it is done. The moon has now eclipsed the sun. The angel has spread its wings. The time has come for bitter things.
Castletown is a Scottish village, and a long time ago witches used to gather in the old mill buildings to worship their master. Fine details will be spared in this story because we do not want to offend nor condemn those who are still alive. On a late winter's night, a coven of 13 gathers around an old stone altar where they meet and greet one another. But this was not to last long. An old fisherman and a busybody wife decide that this was no place for such creepy goings-on, and they call the police. The 13 split ways and re-meet the following week at a different location within the same area in Castletown. The 13 were annoyed and upset at the locals but continue their rituals, laughing and dancing around the small fire in the alternative location. Weeks passed, and all was quiet in the village. All gossip of the 13 passed, and the locals found new things to talk about. An older man from the village was out on a moonlit night because he and his wife had had a disagreement, so he took a walk. He walked around the old harbour, then headed up past where the old dump used to be. He was being careful because he knew there was a quarry and it contained a deep hole of water. He could hear for miles on the calm night, and he did hear things. He heard a cry of a boy. "Help! Help! Help!" The old man headed towards the body of water, calling out as he went. The man heard splashing, gurgling, more splashing. Horrified, he ran across the quarry's broken stones and got to the edge of the water. Nothing. The moon shone upon the water. It was as still as the night. Afraid and shaken, the old man heads for home and calls the police to report what he heard. A search was conducted, but found nothing. Once a year on the very same night the 13 had met, if you are in that area, you can still hear the boy drown. The quarry is no longer there, and the dump is long gone too. Trees are planted there now, and people still report hearing splashing, along with boys' screams of help. Locals who remember this story blame the 13 for this cursed haunting. When I was 13-14, I was staying at a hostel in Ireland. This hostel was directly next to, supposedly, one of the most haunted places in Ireland, an abandoned mansion. In fact, the hostel was built from the bricks of the mansion. There was a story that a widow cursed someone in that mansion, and when they died, they remained. After hearing this, being a young and dumb 13-year-old, I decided to taunt the ghost. Big mistake. Nothing happened after I taunted the ghost until I went to bed. That night, to the very right side of my bed, I heard light breathing. I paid it no mind though because I've had experiences before, and breathing was not a huge alarm for me. Eventually, I fell asleep, and then I got a phone call on my phone between 3 to 5 a.m. It was likely family from back home in the US. I did not answer the call, and I tried to get back to sleep. But there was a problem. My comforter had fallen off the bed, to the right side of the bed, and the breathing was loud and raspy now. At this point, I was scared. I had never heard breathing so loudly before, and it just wouldn't stop. Needless to say, I didn't get my comforter out of fear, and thank God I didn't. In the morning, I was shocked by what I saw. To the right of my bed was a comforter laying on the ground, and it looked like a human was under it. I could make out the arms, legs, head. It was all there. To this day, I genuinely believe that if I reached out for my comforter, something would have reached back. I'd like to share a story with you all, but you will need some context. My grandma is from Olancho, Honduras. In those times, the only way to reach her area was via plane, because there were no roads, and it was very unsafe to travel by car. At the time, my grandma was fighting for my grandfather's love with another woman. Of course, my grandmother won, and had 4 kids and many grandchildren. Remember this. Fast forward, and I'm 14 years old, staying at my grandmother's apartment. The reason being, we were going to drive to Florida. It was going to be me, my little brother, my mother, my aunt, and her friend. But I was staying at my grandmother's until we left in the morning. I was sleeping in the living room. I had to pee, so I put my pants on. With that mission accomplished, I looked for the light switch on the exit door of the apartment. For some reason, I couldn't see it, even though it wasn't dark at all. The living room was just dimly lit. You could see everything in perfect clarity, but for some reason, there was no switch. So I turned my head towards the left, where there was a hallway towards the bathroom. I walked towards the switch, but before I do, I see a black figure. Not a shadow, but a completely black hooded figure, just standing there. I was thinking that my eyes were adjusting after just waking up, so I walked towards the switch. But as soon as I did, the figure walked towards me. I got scared and walked faster towards the switch, and the figure began to walk faster as well. I thought that if I turned on the light, it would go away. I get to the switch and turn it on. The figure was in my face for a split second after turning on the lights. I didn't say anything to anyone because I knew nobody would believe me. Fast forward to the next day on the road to Florida. We all heard albums, told stories, and one story my aunt said revealed everything. Apparently, she met with a palm reader from El Salvador. She said that the palm reader told her her future and something from our family's past. Apparently, when my grandmother was fighting with the other woman to win my grandfather's love, the other woman went to her mother, who happened to be a voodoo priestess, and put a curse on my family. She went on to repeat what the woman told her about the curse. Your family will be haunted by a voodoo god. It's a black figure, no face. It will not harm you, but it will let you know it's there. I said, BS, tell me you're lying. Say you're lying. I then told them what I'd seen the night before. The rest of the drive was quiet after that. A couple of years after, my brother saw the figure on my bed. I'll tell that story tomorrow if anyone is interested. Okay, so after my last story, I thought I'd tell you the story of how my brother finally saw the voodoo god. I say finally because he used to complain that everyone has a ghost experience except him. Literally, everyone in our family has a ghost experience. My family is narcissistic and proud, so for them to admit the stuff like this while calling everything else crap is kinda telling. But I digress. My brother would complain that he wants to see it or have an experience. So, some context. At this point in time, I was going through a phase where I would jump scare people. It was funny. My brother got the majority of the jump scares. So he was paranoid of every turn because I could be hiding behind something. We were living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and we had to share a room, closet, bathroom, etc. So one summer night, I'm outside in my car, smoking a cigarette and talking to some people. My phone rings, and it's my brother. He asks where I'm at, and I say I'm outside the apartment, smoking. He keeps asking me where I really am and stop lying. I'm getting pissed and scared because I hate being called a liar, and he never acts like this. So I ask him in a serious tone, what the hell is going on? He says he thinks he saw it. I park my car and go home. I ask him what happened, and why does he think he saw it? He says he saw our bedroom door open slightly. As soon as you open the door, my bed is right there in front of you. The room was dark, but he says he saw the imprint of something sitting on the edge of my bed. He says he spoke to it, thinking it was me trying to scare him. He told me, he said, Nando, is that you? I know it's you, stop playing. Stop trying to scare me, I can see you, bitch. Then the figure gets up and walks into our closet. He continues, Nando, stop playing. I know you went into the closet, I'm not stupid. He turned on the lights and went in the closet to look for me, but it was empty. That's when he called me. His opinion on the paranormal changed after that. He knew not to mess with any of it. A few weeks ago, I responded to a question in this thread about whether or not curses are real, and I partially described an experience that happened to me concerning black magic and curses from Mauritius. This will be a long one, and everything I mention is real to me and the people who experienced it with me. I will say, however, I used to smoke a lot of cannabis in the past, which was what made me doubt if this was paranormal to begin with. However, I lived with a policeman who was also one of my best friends and never took drugs. I'm a British French guy who, until this happened, I actually classed myself as an anti-theist, as I hated religion. My dad was atheist, and my mum was Catholic, and I was brought up with a Christian way of life. However, I always rejected anything to do with it. I first met this girl, who was Mauritian and working for an airline, when I was living in London, UK. I met her on Plenty of Fish, I think, but it could have been any dating app. We chatted for a couple of weeks, and then decided to meet up when she came for her next flight to London. We connected straight away, and eventually started a relationship. After about 6 months to a year of being with her, I started noticing little things about her, such as sometimes she was very weak and couldn't even get out of bed, as well as cut marks on her body. I eventually wanted to know what was up with her, so pushed for her to tell me, and it turned out that she had the blessing of the Hindu deity Kali put on her when she was younger. Not only that, but she also told me that a curse was put on her family, whereby no female members of her family would be happy in their relationships. She lived with her sister and mother. I, at the time, was very skeptical, and although I didn't think she was lying about it, I did doubt what she was saying, and thought maybe that these marks on her body were from self-mutilation to some extent. I stayed with her for another 2 years after, and although I would notice these marks on her body and her telling me she felt weak, I didn't pay much attention to it, as I was pretty crazy about her. After about 2.5 years of being with her, I decided to go to Mauritius, and had planned to propose to her there. This is when I started to realize she was telling the truth, and it wasn't herself causing these marks on her body. In the run-up to me actually going to Mauritius, I had bought a ring and was living with my friend in a flat in West London. This is when me and my friend started to experience things firsthand. It started with small things like me putting an object down somewhere and then noticing it had moved when I went back to look for it. I eventually emailed myself over the months when these things took place, and have the emails open, which I will now condense into points below as to what this thing that was living with us did. By the way, my flatmate was called Lee. Lee's door opening on its own. Modem turning itself off twice. Cupboard door opening itself. Lee's flip-flops being moved. Dr. Pepper bottle being moved. Coat stand moving on its own when I walked past it. Lee noticed it move, not me. Lee's shoes being moved. Lee called me, but I only noticed after, and apparently he didn't call me. Plug switch next to modem turning itself off. Lee's laptop moved from being plugged in to being moved into his cupboard, hidden under a sheet. Moved my weed and can't find it. Later my mother found it in one of my plant pots when I had moved out. Turned a tap on in the kitchen. Knocking on the flat, 2 sets of 3 knocks. Flipped my laptop over. Came home from work to find my laptop upside down. Turned off modem by the wall socket. Hidden tobacco pouch, later found in the freezer. cut back of my neck, found tobacco in the freezer, turned off my laptop and the switch on the wall to the modem at the same time, Lee's hanger spinning on its own in his cupboard, turned off modem by the modem switch, turned on living room light in the morning, turned on Lee's radiator, hidden my laptop mouse, which I later found weeks later, shoved down my trainer, cut back on my neck. We'll explain further down these points. Turned off my laptop and the switch on the wall to the modem at the same time. Moved a bottle of whiskey next to my bed whilst I was in the room. Flicked picture of Hanuman. Found a mouse in Nike trainer in living room. It had been shoved into the tip. These are all the things that happened that I can remember thanks to me emailing myself during the period from the 5th of January 2012 to the 25th of February 2012, when my last email to myself was. The most shocking to me in the above was that this thing cut my neck, and I can and will probably always remember that sensation. To give it a bit more context, I woke up in the night to a burning sensation at the back of my neck, then fell back asleep. The following day at work, I was in front of my computer and happened to touch the back of my neck without really thinking and felt a cut or scar. I went to the toilet and took a photo of the back of my neck as I remembered what had happened during the night, and I could see I had a cut there. That freaked me out quite a bit, as that was the first and only time this thing had actually touched me. I told my girlfriend about these things, and she conducted some rituals in Mauritius that involved pigs being killed in order to lift the curse. But that didn't seem to do much. I kept questioning her about what she was doing to help me, but she was very vague, as I think she didn't want to freak me out. I also had gone on a date with a girl some years before who was a spiritual healer, and we had kept in touch. She helped me out by doing remote readings and attempted to shift whatever was in my flat. I also burnt white sage and put salt around the flat, as was told that would help. I also started to pray to a Hindu deity called Hanuman and built a shrine for him. This was the only time in my life where I prayed to a deity or god and actually felt their presence. After a while, things started to quieten down, but my girlfriend broke up with me, stating that God didn't want us to be together. And I never even went to Mauritius. If anyone has experienced anything similar, I would love to hear about it. As, like I said, I was a non-believer before, but I'm actually grateful this happened to me, as I now feel as if I know what the world is really about. I keep seeing things that keep disappearing before me. Let me start with a little background. I grew up in a house that has well over 200 years of history. The property originally used to be a complex with a few buildings, but we will focus on the house where my family stayed. 2 rooms barely big enough for a single 6-foot person to lay down, a small shack toilet next to the rooms, and a well in the yard. The place was situated right next to a graveyard, and in one of the original rooms, there's a window facing the graveyard, and you could see the graves 2 feet away from you if you opened the window. It was so close. Nobody knows what the buildings used to be originally, nor when the original buildings were built. But with a bit of digging in local history and land records, I was able to dig up that it was originally used to be part of a royal estate, and changed hands since then 2 times before my family moved in a little less than a century ago. There is conflicting information about it being a taxation office around the 1700s and later being purchased by a trader. I don't have any information about the trader. I was unable to find anything, but the property had definitely changed hands to a different person since then, from whom finally my grandparents had bought the property from. Around that time, my country gained independence, and my grandpa, was sort of involved in this independence movement as well. And the place had also become a spot where many of those resistance meetings were held in the different buildings in the complex. Much of the reason why my grandparents resided in such small rooms on one side of the complex. Around that time, 2 people committed suicide in one of the rooms in one of the buildings. There are legends that when it was still under the royal estate, a lot of people were killed here for one reason or another. My grandma used to tell me this, but I don't know much about it. Moving on, since I don't know much of what happened after that. After independence, most of the other buildings, excluding the house, were converted to a small hotel and modified and put up for rent as shops, and some presence from the independence movement occupied some parts of the other buildings in the complex. Anyways, around the 1960s, the area changed a lot. The graveyard was eventually moved. I don't know why, and the area was redeveloped. My grandpa also expanded the house where they stayed, but with the original structures incorporated into it. Built more rooms and better toilet, etc. He also purchased some adjacent plots at the time and built a wall around much of the perimeter. One day, a few years later, they will find a dead body floating in the well. Someone jumped the perimeter wall and committed suicide in the well. The body was taken out and the well was cleaned, and they continued drinking water from it. Later in the 70s, there was a bit of a communist uprising in the country, and a lot of violence took place. A person was stabbed to death inside of our house, and a bombing by communists of our house. A couple more were killed around the complex, as well in other buildings. After a decade or so, the political climate had much settled down, and my grandparents once more decided to expand the house, and this time build an entire new house right next to the old one, in the plots that were part of the graveyard previously. This is the little background of the house, much of which I didn't know until 3 years ago. Now my story begins. Since I was 3 years old, I apparently used to see a lady around the house and talk to her. But when someone would ask whom I was talking to, I would point and tell them, but nobody was there. Well, it's not just me with whom such incidents had taken place. My grandma used to see a lady in another building, and my parents have had similar experiences of seeing people around the house as well as some guests who didn't know anything about the house. But we will stick to what happened to me. This incident was when I was around 5 to 6 years old. One day at night, the power went out, and when the power returned, I saw this shadow of a humanoid creature with a fox-like tail going up the stairs. I saw it so vividly, I can still remember it now. And I got a fever immediately and was sick for a few days after that. Nothing much happened to me after that. Not anything that I can remember, but I think it was the beginning of my horror. When I was 12 to 13, I had this friend. One day when she came over to my house, she saw something, and she got so scared she immediately went home. She never talked to me again, completely cut contact. We often got the vibes of someone staring at us, or going up and down the stairs. Everyone felt this in the house after that. Nothing much happened to me after that, until around 2016, when I was around 15 to 16. I started having dreams of talking to this girl who had glasses on. They were very vivid dreams. I still remembered her very clearly. Both of us were talking on the roof of the house, and she would tell me about herself. These dreams continued multiple times every night. Around the same time, my school crush used to come over to my house, and one day after she left my house, it was pretty late. She went to her home. She lived close by, and that night she woke up in the middle of the night and heard a voice calling her from a tree in her yard. When she took a look outside of her window, she saw someone hanging on the tree. Soon after this, she started keeping her distance. She was super frightened, and her family moved away to another city. Meanwhile, I continued to have dreams of the same girl, where we would confide so much of our stuff to each other. Then came one evening, around that time, that I saw this girl. The girl from the dreams I had been having for months. The same dreams. She was standing outside of my room. She called my name and turned around and left. I was in bed and I got up to run after her. But she had disappeared. But this was impossible, because I knew the front door was locked and nobody was there except me and my mum in the house. Nobody had seen her leave. There were a bunch of people working outside of the front door. She would have had to cross past them, and none of them saw her. Nor did I see her leave the front door, and my mum, who was also in the house at the time, saw and heard her clearly, and she also ran after her, but she did not seem to see where she went either. From that day on, I stopped having her dreams, but new problems started to arise soon after that winter. I saw that shadow creature with the foxtail again. This time, it was followed by a death in the house soon after. After that, it felt super uneasy for everyone to stay in the house. But after a few weeks, things had settled down a bit, till I started having super strange dreams. But since 2016, I would have these strange dreams on nightmares. Most days, they were mostly related to ghosts, and they continue to this day. And people still continue to see things around the house.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.